All right, friends, welcome back to the Strong Life Podcast. I'm with my friend, Scott Mendelson, infinityfitness.com. Scott was on in December, maybe, I don't know, it was around the holidays. We spoke about nutrition, especially for men in the ages of like mid 30s, mid 40s. But I know some of my listeners are 50s and some of my listeners are 20s. So we're going to get into this. We're maybe going to touch upon some stuff on nutrition, training with how it affects not just fat loss, but testosterone. And here's how I want to open this up, Scott. This will be interesting to you. I just sent you a Instagram message that showed a photo, and for the camera, hard to see, but it shows like, a normal testosterone level in 2022 shows like somebody with like a roly-poly belly. And then they're saying that's what like the normal is now versus 20 years ago, a lot more leaner people. And I remember my buddy Jim Steele said, when you look at the photos of Evel Knievel from the late 70s, early 80s, he said everybody in the stands was ripped, including the people smoking cigarettes. You didn't have, and you and I think are the same age. So we kind of grew up around that era. And now we see this. And for example, at my high school last week, the football players were training and they were like getting all hyped up and they took off their shirts, and very few of them had, a lean midsection. And one of the coaches was like, that's beer. I was like, dude, that is not a beer belly. A kid might drink a beer on a weekend or whatever they're doing, sneaking in. That's not a beer belly. That's, years of processed shit. I look at a physique and I always say I could see SpaghettiOs or steak and potatoes. I don't even know if SpaghettiOs exists anymore, but when you and I were kids, you remember that?
Oh, yeah. I think correct. I think a lot of the youth athletes are not as lean because the diet's not as good. The parents are giving them more fast food. But another problem I see is many of them are using too much of the sports drinks that are high in sugar. It's like, well, I'm exercising, but I'm constantly feeding the body the sugar source to burn instead of stored fat. So it's really hard to get lean.
Yeah.
Especially for a lot of the lineman type body types when they're constantly sucking down the sugar.
Yep.
And my argument would be, instead of those sports drinks, they could get their electrolytes a different way, like, through the diet. So, the sports drinks are not the only answer, but they're a convenient answer. It's much like a soft drink. And, there's sponsorships and other things that put them in front of their face. So the, young athletes and coaches thinks that's what they should be drinking. I don't agree.
I don't know what the process is called, but I spoke to a guy who owns a supplement company, and 7-Eleven wanted to get his protein powder in, but they said it had to be R2D, ready to drink. And so he said if it was going to be ready to drink, it was going to have to go through this process where in the bottle, so you would know the process, I guess, it's like heated up and it like releases. I don't know what it does. Do you know
it probably denatures the protein to a degree, because what they're doing is they're making it into, a single bottle with liquid in there. So somebody can twist off the cap and drink it, whether it be in a can or like a bottle or even a box.
Plastic bottle.
But, that'll change the composition of their protein. They've got to standardize things in a way that make it work for that packaging, because 7-Eleven or other convenience stores, that's the name of the game. The retailers have rigid ideals of the way they want to sell things, and if you don't meet that criteria, they'll just find somebody else. They're not real worried about the quality of the product.
They're not like, these kids need clean protein. The guy said like they were going to offer it as like a ready to mix. You add water to it, and he's like 7-Eleven, and they're not interested in that. And so anyway, we're gonna let's tackle kind of one topic, or my ADD will take us everywhere. Let's start with fat loss. We're approaching spring. Some people are going to try to crash course getting lean too late. And then they're going to go on this, what I've seen is like that yo-yo dieting. And so you work with busy professionals, men, women. What does the process now, we are in mid-February, look like when somebody's needs to lean out?
The process now is for people to ask themselves, are they pushing themselves to get better, or are they just going through the motions? at this time of year. We're in the middle of February, the new year's in the rear view mirror. At what date do people start really cleaning up the diet and starting to train more consistently? And, around this time, I'm asking a lot of clients and, new people that approach me, when you assess yourself, how many days out of the week would you actually give yourself an A as it relates to your nutrition consumption? And most people, when they take a look back, as I ask them to record for a week or two, they find their compliance is far less than what they thought. One, same thing with training. Are you getting stronger? Are you pushing yourself? Not necessarily in terms of the total volume of training, but if I say to them, hey, you're working out 4 times a week, how would you, on a scale of 1 to 10, rank your effort in those sessions, the quality of those sessions? And again, people go back and like, you know what? They weren't as good as what I thought. So sometimes that can be an effort problem. Sometimes people do not know how to push themselves in terms of increasing weight loads and having a higher level of effort. Sometimes people are stalled out because they're overtrained, not recovering well, or for any other number of reasons, but you don't know what you don't know. So, I try and provide a reality check to a lot of people around this time of year to then recalibrate some strategies to get them on a faster track so that when spring comes, they're far ahead of the game.
What's step one when you like a common fix? What's a step one common fix? Let's talk about men. Predominantly, the listeners here are men. What tends to be an area that you're like, well, this is usually common amongst men that we have to fix in their eating habits?
Well, if we're looking at, starting from kind of the beginning, let's somebody that's not that far along, we want to eliminate refined foods and foods that irritate them. So refined foods, things like bread, pasta, baked goods, things of that nature, all the junk foods fall in that category. No brainer, get rid of those, which is harder for some people than others.
100% get rid of, because some people, Scott, are like, hey, on a Wednesday, you could have a cheat meal and this and that. Do you allow that? Or
that's another topic, that we can discuss, the cheat meal thing. What is a cheat meal to you? What is a cheat meal to me? So here's the thing. As it relates to food allergies, irritations, and intolerances, people can be sensitive to certain foods that they really never realize until they take some time to look at the situation and realize that following a meal, they don't feel good. They have a lot of bloating. They have some irritability. And those symptoms can last for several days and kind of screw up your system and distract it from burning fat. So let's take the example of, we'll have a cheat meal, eat whatever you want, once a week. And if somebody's consuming unknowingly a lot of things they're sensitive to, and it has them reeling for days, is that a good strategy? No, it's not. I very rarely see, people that can use the eat anything you want cheat meal days or meals on a regular basis that achieve any kind of significant success. I think there are certainly ways to change up the diet, and I encourage that on certain days of the week, but I like there to be more strategy. I like using the right carbohydrate sources. If you're, consuming a lot of refined foods and fried foods, it's not just about a higher calorie intake that day. You're doing things to the fat cells and the hormones and the digestive system that are going to slow you down for the days following. So I believe in a different, approach than that. But back to my point is that, if you start by eliminating the refined foods and then eliminating foods that irritate you, that's a very good first step. And then we get to more advanced strategies, looking at macronutrient cycling and things of that nature. So what you need at any given time, I'm kind of looking at where you are. So in mid-February, there's a fair number of people that have done some good things to eliminate refined foods and things that irritate them. Maybe they're eliminating dairy and so forth. Those are good steps that we might have to get a little bit more complicated, going from there to build on that base.
So it's going to take meal prep. That's going to be, and I'm sure somebody's saying like, Scott, I've got kids. I work 10 hours a day. Where do you go from there with that?
Where I go from there is to say, then you're a fasting type of approach with only a couple of meals per day, because then there's less to prep. And that's actually a good approach. So, I talked to somebody the other day, and he goes to Chipotle every day for lunch, which works out well for us. We rotate the different types of protein. He gets a bowl with, lettuce. He'll get guacamole there. The peppers and onions and so forth, those work well for him. We might one day or 1 or 2 days a week, we might add rice to that. I don't remember what I told him tied to his training sessions, right? So he trains late morning, he goes to eat lunch. So some rice after training works well a couple times per week. So that's an example. Chipotle actually has good ingredients in general. But you can't go in there and eat chips and expect to be really lean, right? Let's use some common sense. We're not going to drink, regular soda and think we're going to get really lean with that. But they do have good choices. It's a matter of having the discipline to order the right things there. They do have a good rotation of things that you can do. And then if you eat dinner at home, then, hopefully you can prep in bulk once a week or make your dinner one day a week for you and your kids at the same time and give them good choices. And then that's it, just those 2 meals per day. I find for that reason, it limits people's ability to screw up because they're not, having to eat as often. So they're not seeking out bad things. They have some hard rules. If somebody brings donuts in the office, it's like, well, I'm supposed to be fasting today. I'm not eating breakfast, so I'm not even going to consider eating that. Simple, but effective.
Did you ever, I think Mark Bell, he used to live in Ohio 20. Did he ever work with you guys?
I spoke to him several times. I remember while he was training at Westside and just, had some casual conversations with him. I don't recall meeting him, but, when he was training at Westside, from what I know, I mean, he was a very accomplished,
Pro
lifter.
wrestling.
Yeah, I think when I talked to him a few times, he was wrestling at the time too. I mean,
So he wasn't in the powerlifting mode yet. He was like 215, 220 back then. But the reason why I asked was, number one, he lived in Ohio.
Mhm.
And then, of course, when he started powerlifting, he went to super heavyweight or heavyweight. So he was around, I think he was super heavyweight because he was 330, something like that.
Mhm.
And then when he started getting into his health kick, I remember him saying, similar to what you're saying, which is opposite of what a lot of people say with this, go ahead and do a cheat meal. He's like, don't do the cheat meal. See how long you could go without a cheat meal. See if you could go 3 weeks without a cheat meal. He's like, test yourself. And it was so opposite because people were like, hey, on a Wednesday night or a Sunday, have a cheat day. Or people look at The Rock and he has that big cheat day. And look, here's the reality. I'm sure The Rock is on some sort of TRT,
Mhm.
right? He's also a genetic freak. He's like, I think he's half black, half Samoan. So oftentimes those guys tend to be more muscular. And that's like, you can, even me with my experience, you could look at somebody and quickly get swayed, but it's very much like training when I listen to you. It's the basics that are going to provide the results.
Yeah. And, in the Rock situation too, I think he has an incredibly high volume of training. Yeah. So, I mean, he's burning a ton of calories,
Supposedly he takes a Stairmaster where like the Stairmaster goes into his hotel.
Yeah, I
Wherever
mean,
he
so
travels.
he's got a lot of activity. I ran into a pilot who operates private planes, and I don't remember how he got in this conversation. He goes, "Do you know The Rock?" I said, "No, I don't know him." He goes, "Well, he has these specialty bars that he travels with. Like, so he has, I guess deadlift bars or other bars that he'll take with him from location to location." So yeah, he's all about being prepared for, whatever he wants to do with training. I think they put gyms on set for him and so forth. But yeah, on the cheat meal front, if he and I were to meet, I would tell him I don't agree with that. And, I don't agree with the alcohol intake, depending on how often he's doing that. I don't think most people can drink tequila and get ripped. And I don't know how often he's drinking, but I see those pictures sometimes and they've got tequila and French toast or something like that. Interesting combo.
Cheat
I think
meals
for his
look great.
genetics, it can work, but I think for most people, no.
Yeah, for most people, no. So I want to tackle this Instagram post. And for people listening, I'll post this to the website or the guy who posted it, Rubio Fuerte, Public Health Nutrition. So it's, a photo of the guy who's lean, midsection, ripped, then the other like fat abs, which you see, I live in a beach town, so I could see it all over from the younger kids to the adults. But in this beach town, these kids surf a lot. So I feel like I don't see it as much. But anyway, he said like the feed says the average 20-year-old now has the
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. The average 20-year-old now has the testosterone levels of a 70-year-old in the year 2000. That's like an extreme statement. I'm going to repeat it one more time for the people listening and for you. The average 20-year-old of today has the testosterone levels of a 70-year-old from the year 2000. So like before smartphones, the internet was in its infancy still. Saying average testosterone has dropped approximately 50% over the past 2 decades. He mentions research, but it's Instagram, so I don't expect him to put the journal links down. So he says, reduce my perspective. Hold on, let's see. The weapons to promote testosterone deficiency in men are processed sugar, which you mentioned, seed oils, which we mentioned in the first podcast. I think you also mentioned when those oils are like heated up, they do something, they like help multiply the fat cells in the body.
Things fried in corn oil, I don't know what their impact are on testosterone levels, but certainly they're going to proliferate the amount of fat cells you have and the size of those cells. So in general, if there's a correlation to high body fat and low testosterone, then things fried in corn oil would contribute, I suppose.
Which is usually restaurant food and baked
French
goods.
fries, fried chicken, chicken fingers, stuff like that. On another note, for people that I'm working with, let's say it's a college football player or even a pro football player that wants to gain size. I like having them use French fries, but they're fried in like beef tallow, which is like beef lard, and tastes really
again,
good.
Scott? Beef what?
So if you want to make French fries without corn oil, you can fry them in beef lard. It's called beef tallow. Mm-hmm. And that's a far better choice, actually very good for gaining lean body mass because you're combining the carbohydrates with a good dietary fat source. And that fat source works very well at high temperatures. So beef tallow works real well. Lard can work really well too, organic preferably, because the composition of those dietary fats are much better. I'll send you a picture of
I've seen
what it looks like, but it's
which
good
is
stuff.
Like duck fat, right? Ghee.
Duck fat's more fancy, that's I think a lot of French cooks, things like that, like to use that. I don't have a lot of experience with that.
I saw it at like the local, there's like a old health store in town.
Yeah. People cook with it, sure.
Yeah. And what about like the fat from bacon? Is that okay to reuse or no?
Yeah.
It is. Okay. Last night, so today's Thursday. So last night I had a pretty hectic day. I can't remember if I even ate lunch. I know my breakfast is usually 4 eggs. Then last night I put bacon, half an onion, and a ribeye in a frying pan, and I just let the bacon fat go. And so I ate half of that. And then this morning was the other half after training with 2 eggs on it. So it was a high fat, I think it's good protein. Yeah. But when you eat like that, you got to watch the carbs. So here's the next thing that's said. This is interesting. So he's talking about the weapons that promote testosterone deficiency. Really, what crushes testosterone? Sugar, seed oils, soy, Tinder, which is that like dating site, online porn, which is, they say like it's I can't remember. I heard like that guy, Naval, who's the guy, he's like a co-founder of Twitter and Facebook. He said, even though I'm like the co-founder of these things, he's like, they suck you into this game that you never feel like you're winning. So you could just keep playing it. And so he's mentioned like these kids of today will be, they'll watch porn and then they'll be like, well, I never have to go out and get a date. And it's almost like hunting, so, in a respect. What else does he say? Criminalizing masculinity. So encouraging men to be more like feminine. Gender studies, suggesting that more agreeable people are, quote, morally superior. So he's saying like all these things have, help or hurt testosterone levels. And so, pretty, interesting stuff that it's not just nutrition based. It's like your environment, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not aware of what the studies he looked at, but yeah, it very well could be that the testosterone levels of the average male are dropping significantly. I do think that's the case, especially for men in their 30s and 40s and 50s. And I think there's probably a lot of data that's looking at that um, right now. But yeah, I think for the youth athletes, the environment they're in, the way they're taught, and many other things are limiting their development in many ways. Perhaps 20 years ago, it was okay to be more competitive and so forth, and especially in sporting venues. But when you're talking about men over 30, I think there's also been a huge increase in stress that correlates with reduced testosterone.
Yeah. What kind of
Um,
stress what do you view as the stressors?
Well, there's usually a stress from either, let's say their personal life or their work life, or a combination of both, right? And then there can be a lot of stress generated from training, overtraining particularly. And what is overtraining? I remember there was a saying in CrossFit that there's no such thing as overtraining. If I heard that right, that blows my mind, because there sure as hell is a scientific
You'll
definition of
you'll hear
overtraining.
people say you're under rested and undernourished, like you're not sleeping enough, you're not eating enough.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the issue with CrossFit was it was constantly that
Mm-hmm.
high intensity, destroy, and you
Mm-hmm.
had to be wiped out at the
Yeah, it
end
was
of it.
almost like they were seeking out fatigue, and hey, it worked well for some of them, but I think there are others that you can't do that. We talk about genetic differences. There's some people that don't thrive on, high volume and, let's say training to exhaustion. So it's just, different strokes for different folks. But I do think there's a large percentage of the population that overtrains, and that could be a combination of either too much training, the wrong type of training, or like you mentioned, they're not doing enough to accelerate recovery, and that plays into their diet, their rest, their lifestyle, what they're doing with supplementation, and so forth. The timing of training can play a big role there too. But yes, I think that environmental factors, many other factors, are having their stress to be very high. We're in a stressful, as you mentioned, all the online stuff. So
I
what do
think
we do about it? Well,
the
it's very
phone is a
easy for me to
stressor.
tell somebody, hey, just reduce your stress. I mean, that's not so easy. I think it's more along the lines, you got to work with it. So here's some things that you can use. If you feel, let's say you ask yourself on a scale of 1 to 10, how stressed am I on a daily basis? Let's say if you're over a 6, then you're going to be very sensitive to carbohydrate intake, because high levels of, let's say, cortisol, which can correlate with elevated stress, has a negative impact on your insulin sensitivity. So that means your body may be over secreting insulin, which is the body's most potent fat storing hormone, and you don't want that elevated around the clock. And what helps to elevate it? Well, carbohydrate intake can help to elevate it, and that puts you in more of a fat storing mode. And this is a funny one. Well, all I need to do to lose fat is be in a caloric deficit. Well, if your insulin sensitivity is really poor and you're in a caloric deficit and you're consuming, a fair amount of carbohydrate, I guarantee you're going to lose muscle and accumulate body fat. And your weight might reduce a little bit. Your body composition sure as hell is not going to improve. So I think people need to be aware, if they are stressed, how to modify what they're doing. And I think it involves probably a lower carb approach, also being more conservative in the training volume and frequency, and then try and work out some of those other, stressful issues. But you can't go full tilt if you are highly stressed on volume and being aggressive with things. It's just a recipe for disaster.
In my mid 20s, I was a fifth year teacher and I transferred to teaching at a middle school.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember like driving and like put my hand on my stomach and I was like, what the fuck is this? And I had like rolls on my stomach.
Oh,
I was so stressed out working at that school with like the behavior of the kids,
yeah.
lack of administrative support. And I wasn't a strength coach at that time and I didn't understand what the hell was going on. And the stress destroyed my body. And that was the year I tore my ACL. So I got fat. I looked like a, power lifter when I was coming from this bodybuilding background, but
Mm-hmm.
stress, the emotional stress I emphasize, and I never know who's a first time listener. So I often emphasize like emotional stress is more difficult on your body, more damaging on your body than you going through a difficult training session. Because when you have a hard training session, you feel invigorated, even if it's
Yep.
like, you're doing a crazy CrossFit workout. You're like happy with yourself, so to speak. So whereas emotional stress, it really, has this like lingering effect on the body. So you're saying if we have high stress, our cortisol levels are consistently elevated?
Probably, or too low. There's another situation where you kind of burn yourself out,
Mm-hmm.
and we need some cortisol to wake up in the morning, for example. And if you have somebody that has a hard time waking up in the morning, even though they slept 7, 8 hours, they may have whacked out the system so much that their cortisol levels are not rising at the right time, and they feel tired in the morning, without explanation. That probably correlates to somebody that's using a lot of stimulants,
Like just too much coffee, too much
maybe,
caffeine.
or pre-workout stimulants, or as I call it, bored out of my mind syndrome. And talking about the modern man, let's say, or modern woman, we do all this stuff standing or sitting behind a desk. And, it can be boring. And I think that brings on a lot of just mental malaise and fatigue. So what do a lot of people want to do? They want to grab for some stimulants, too often. Certainly I've been guilty of that. So one of the things I do recommend, I think just a good thing for longevity is, one, if you can get a standing desk, use it. I think it's just a good thing. You don't have to stand all day. But, if you're going to have some breaks during the day, go take a walk, try and get outside, even if the weather's bad, climb the stairs,
Yes.
do something just to be active. You don't have to break a sweat. But I find that that's good for energy, good for the mind. You may gain some fat burning benefits. I mean, I don't think people should really factor that in. But, people who monitor their number of steps each day, stuff like that, it's not a bad habit. So getting some more activity during the workday, probably going to be less bored, probably going to have more energy, probably going to rely less on stimulants, and may seek out, less snacks between meals because you're not as bored.
And you're taking pride in taking care of your body. So you live in Ohio, I'm in New Jersey. We're on that Eastern Standard Time.
Mm-hmm.
We go through a good 6 months with a quite a lack of sun,
Yep.
especially if April is the April showers,
Mm-hmm.
which may very well be. So once Thanksgiving hits, people really limit their outdoor time. And I remember visiting my brother in San Diego in during my winter break, so it may have been like March, and everybody's walking outside during lunch. Like women are in their suit attire with
Mm-hmm.
running sneakers. I mean, it's packed with people utilizing their lunch as an activity time. Once it's cold, people kind of fear that stuff. And speaking of cold weather, I was in South Carolina last weekend at this gathering, and predominantly all those people were hunters. And one thing I really noticed about them before this event was they don't eat store purchased meat, steaks and such. They hunt
Mm-hmm.
deer and elk.
Mm-hmm.
So they're eating venison and elk, and men older than me are ripped. They're
Oh
eating
yeah,
this.
I mean, look, if you look at a hunter's lifestyle, especially some of the people you are with, I think I knew where you were. They also weight train. They
Yes.
probably don't eat much by way of refined foods. They're very
Mm-hmm.
active.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure there are some hunters that work at a desk, but I'm going to guess that most of them have different types of occupations where they can be more active throughout the day. So perhaps that hunter's lifestyle, jives real well with in general an active lifestyle. So their hobbies are going out and doing stuff and shooting things with bows and arrows, which is exercise, versus other people's hobbies sitting at home playing video games. Which one's going to lend itself better to a better quality of life and physique? Well, I guess the hunter, is going to have a lot of things going for them. There's probably something also more primal in it too. I've never
Yes.
hunted. I've just never interested me. I have other ways to get activity. I don't have anything against it, but just not something I tried. But I think there's a lot of sense of accomplishment in it for the people that do it. And that feeds to more of a high mental drive, which can affect testosterone and a lot of other things. So, there's probably some underlying things there that you don't realize unless you kind of do it or take the time to talk to a lot of those people that, that do the hunting stuff.
Yeah, there was a very different energy in the air
Mhm.
because you're right. They're shooting their bow, they're, shooting firearms, and they go out on maybe a day hunting trip, maybe a 3 to 4 day trip, or maybe a 3 to 4 week trip. And it's interesting when what they eat is what they kill. So they're eating a high protein. I don't think the fat content is very high in those animals because it's game meat.
Yeah.
But they tend to add, like the guy, his name is on Instagram. His name's Andy, but his Instagram is the flip flop guy. He has like a dressing that you put on the steak, and it's
Mhm.
like oil and garlic and rosemary. So you're getting the fat from there. And these guys say when they travel, they might be eating like those ready to meals ready to eat, or they take a loaf of bread and peanut butter and eat peanut butter sandwiches, but they're hiking and moving and lifting stuff. And, to that regard, you're right. The testosterone boosting of that is infinitely greater than somebody who's sitting behind a desk. But we mentioned before we recorded that we would talk about some of the testosterone. Can foods boost testosterone, Scott? I mean, what's the
Well, yeah, dietary fat, I think, has properties that are anabolic in nature, help to increase natural testosterone production. I don't think there's any doubt about that. The good sources, let's call them, dietary fat from grass-fed beef, or grass-fed butter, for example, extra virgin olive oil, nuts, avocados, things like
yes?
that. But probably the saturated fats probably have the greatest properties for being anabolic in general, off the top of my head. I think that carbohydrates are not the enemy and they can be used at the right time, and they're very anti-catabolic. So one of the things that if you're looking at an athlete and looking at their blood work, for example, as Dr. Serrano does very often, what is their testosterone to cortisol ratio? Gives you a picture perhaps as to how well the body is using its natural testosterone production. Because if the cortisol levels are very high, then that testosterone to cortisol ratio may not be very good. So one of the things that you would do in that case is you might tell somebody, well, you know what, you need some more carbohydrate following training from the right sources to be more anti-catabolic. Just an example that's worked really well. So you could have somebody doing a great job with a low carbohydrate diet, great job with training, but maybe they're a little bit higher on the stress scale and you want to improve some things for them. So you might use some targeted carbohydrate for them post training in combination with lean protein and good dietary fat sources. And that could be a real huge recipe of success for them with just that change during the meals
What's
following training.
what's your what carbohydrates do you like to see
The most
people?
common ones that don't irritate people would be a variety of rice. When I say rice, that's white rice, brown rice, not rice fried in soybean oil or, like they do at a Chinese restaurant
Right.
very often. By the way, I had somebody ask me this when I was doing a speaking event. What is a good alternative cooking oil for somebody that likes to eat a lot of Asian cuisine? Sesame oil is one that Dr. Serrano told me. He's asked me the other day, because typically they use in the Chinese restaurants, I believe they're using corn oil or they're using a lot of soy, obviously. But what was the other one they were using? Bad stuff.
Yeah,
So
corn
you might
oil
not
is
find a restaurant to do that, but at home, if
right.
you want to try a lot of things with sesame oil, it works real well.
Yeah.
But anyway, rice is a very good source, and different types of potatoes. Those tend to work very well for most people.
Yeah.
I will look at somebody and I will try some different sources of carbohydrate and then see how they respond to them. I'll look at kind of what do they look like post training. I give a little survey. How are their energy levels? Do their muscles feel fuller the next day? And I might evaluate other different types of, sources and amounts of carbohydrate. What's the right amount for a Joe bodybuilder or Joe strength athlete to consume post training that fills the muscles and makes him feel good without spilling over so much to bloat him? Because if it's spilling over, that would indicate we're leaving a lot left over to store fat as well. So there's some ways to calibrate.
You could feel it. For example, when I was in my younger years competing in bodybuilding, I would always have egg whites and oatmeal.
Mm-hmm.
Fine. Sometimes I'll eat oatmeal, and we do the gluten-free oatmeal. and I'm bloated. I feel like my digestion doesn't like, yeah. But if I do potatoes or rice, I feel very good, especially, potatoes, whether it's like white, gold, or sweet potatoes. And I just boil them, or I bake them. It doesn't bother. And I get the next day I tend to really get a big pump. And so that to me is a simple way. You say it a lot, like you got to pay attention. What does your body feel like? Are you fatigued? Does your stomach bother you? And not being a nutrition expert, I have heard people talk about like how a lot of your health kind of lives in your gut. So what does that mean if you were deciphering that phrase?
I like to look at it this way. If you're eating things that irritate you, like we talked about some of the signals,
Mhm.
bloating, fatigue, joint pain, low energy, stomach upset, skin rashes, if those things are happening and you're eating things that irritate you on a consistent basis, that sucks up a lot of the body's resources to kind of deal with that mess. So there's less resources available to repair muscle, to burn fat, to drive high energy levels. One of the things too, for our professional athletes, when I'm working with them, I'm looking very closely at the pre-competition meal, because one of the signs too, when you're eating things that irritate you, is a lot of mental fogginess.
Mm.
Well, if you're going up on the mound and you're looking to throw a heater at 95 miles per hour, there is some stress involved in that and hitting the corner, because if you throw it fat down the middle of the plate, the guy's going to take it out of the park on you, right? So pitchers, need to have a lot of confidence in what they're doing, need to be very sharp, because there's a small margin between throwing a strike and, them hitting a home run, right? So when your body doesn't respond well to things for a number of reasons, you're distracting a lot of the body's resources. And I think, as we talked about probably last time, when people get over 30, 35, it's more of an issue. It becomes more prevalent. And this is something that I have to explain to people all the time. Just because you had a certain diet 20 years ago that worked great and you were ripped does not mean it's going to work today, because circumstances change. One of those common circumstances is the development of food allergies, irritations, and intolerances, and a decline in natural digestive enzyme production.
You guys carry enzymes on your website?
Yeah, Dr. Serrano developed the EZ14, which is a digestive enzyme catalyst. It has 14 carefully calibrated ingredients, some of which the body makes, some of which the body doesn't make. And this is something Dr. Serrano's researched very extensively, looking at digestion for patients, because he's been, on the forefront of dealing with food allergies, irritations, and intolerances, and eliminating certain things that irritate people, not only for performance and body comp, but a lot of patients that had health problems, a variety of things, ranging from people that may have had some mental disorders or arthritis or other things. He finds that food allergies, irritations, and intolerances can contribute to problems for a pretty wide variety of people. So why not start there, in combination, with other levels of treatment, and see what kind of improvements you can get. And sometimes it can be dramatic, just by eliminating, certain things that people eat. But digestive enzymes are very important, because for many people, they've depleted them because of certain things they've eaten unknowingly. Age also depletes things, to stress depletes digestive enzymes as well. So we got one of the executives that shows up that's stressed. We're going to have them use EZ14. We're going to have them use alpha meg M3. And, very sometimes like, well, why am I spending on this? I have an executive mind. You didn't justify that. Just shut the fuck up and do what we're telling you to do for once. I mean, it's like, listen, I told a guy the other day, I said, listen, if you were so fucking smart with this as it relates to training nutrition, you'd have no reason to be 50 pounds overweight and coming to me for help. Right? It's like, if I wanted my balance sheet adjusted, because this guy was a CFO, I would come to you and I would be there listening with a pen and paper, because you're the expert.
Right.
Well, in this case, I'm the fucking expert. All right. So, just do it. I mean, it's not that complicated. And you know what he said? You're right. He didn't like it the way I presented it to him.
Right. But sometimes we need an aggressive approach. And, going to that Instagram post 20 years ago, 30 years ago, that is how people spoke with you. I remember my first, when I was competing in bodybuilding, the guy who was doing our nutrition and kind of helping us with the training, he said a lot of shut the fuck up. Like, stop. You're not telling me what to do. Like, he's like, I've been fucking coaching people for twice as long as you walked the earth. you
I think
know,
there's a careful balance between giving a coach feedback, which I
yeah,
ask for feedback all the time,
right.
or challenging the coach on everything where it's like nothing gets done.
Nothing gets done in those,
Right.
and people do that a lot, in my kind of world. Parents have too many coaches for the kids, and now you got, he said do this, he said do that, then they're coming back to you, and
I've
it's
had a lot of frank conversations with parents
yeah,
and, and telling them, listen, your kid is not going to be a professional athlete. Period. End of story. I don't have those genetics. He doesn't
right.
either.
I don't even
Your
know what the
approach is
percentage. Yeah,
destroying this kid. He's so stressed by getting advice from so many of these, supposed experts, and he's pissing off the actual real coach that he's never going to get a chance to develop because you've just created this complexity bubble around him. So there's some realities of that. An athlete is in full control of their effort, their attitude, their communication. That's about it. Can't control the referee, can't control what a lot of the competition does. But for a lot of these parents that have all these different technical coaches, it just doesn't work.
it's
That
too
I
much.
see.
There's a documentary that was out quite a bit ago. You've probably heard of it or seen it, called the Marinovich Project. Do you remember that, Scott?
I know the story of Todd and his father, Marv,
Marv.
right? Was that
Yeah,
who passed away not that long ago, right?
that's right. I think he did. So Marv was an early NFL strength coach. He was also an early proponent of what the Russians did in training. I don't know if he traveled to Russia, but
Probably.
now we're very American coaches are excellent, and we're also learning, like my buddy Travis Mass said, I don't really want to read anything from a Russian coach because I don't, I'm just assuming that the program that's shared from this Russian translated text was done on a, chemically enhanced athlete. So it's like it's throwing out kind of the validity. And not that Americans don't, take steroids or,
Well,
performance
there it was
enhancing drugs.
required. I mean, it was. I mean, it was. This is a part of the regimen.
Correct. And
And
also, if you want to take care of your family, and your family wants food and a house,
yeah.
and you want a car, yeah, this is there's also that. But the Marinovich Project is I think an important documentary for parents to watch, coaches to watch. And then we had the Icarus Project, which showed how you saw that, how they were like the
Parts of it.
government, yeah, the government was involved with, like, how to I guess, like, hijack the urine test and all that stuff. I mean, it was really, the KGB was involved with it.
Mm-hmm.
So we got a few minutes left here. The website, Scott, Infinity-Fitness
No,
or
infinityfitness.com.
.com.
Just how it
So
sounds.
we mentioned enzymes. I was listening to a podcast that Dr. Serrano was doing with Brian recently, and he
Yeah.
was talking about the branch chain aminos. Let's go back to that stressed out, corporate guy. What are the supplements he's on from you guys?
So for anybody that's stressed, or anybody that wants to, improve their rates of recovery, the 100% MR is a scientifically engineered blend of branch chain, glutamine, taurine, B complex vitamins, and niacin. However, not all branch chains are created equal. Dr. Serrano has a different ratio that he's developed specific to the 100% MR. So using that before and after training, going to have a miraculous impact on recovery, less soreness, less mental fatigue, which means you're going to benefit more from your hard work, right? You don't want to be completely destroyed following a training session the next couple of days. That's a sign you haven't recovered well. So the 100% MR, tremendous for accelerating recovery of the muscles and the nervous system, so people feel sharp. Very important for athletes that have multiple practices and lifts and competition in a week. And then
even
I think I had a couple of people email me about that podcast. I haven't listened to it yet, but he also mentioned the muscle synthesis powder, which is a free form amino acid, great for increasing lean muscle tissue, improving the muscle to fat ratio. So we combine those two powders pre and post training. For most people, a couple scoops of each with water, and they're dynamite. They bypass digestive barriers because they're purely amino acids. They're not protein, so they're very easily utilized.
You're not getting the bloat like you would from I don't know, a whey or whatever kind of protein powder.
Right.
Getting the gas. Well, niacin, I always recall being in like pre-workouts. So in the 100% MR, having niacin in there, you always get that flush feeling. Is it a transporter for, what is the role of niacin?
Yeah, it's going to help. I think it helps the blood flow. It helps with the overall raw material flow. Yeah, you might notice a little bit increase in body temperature. I think it's good during the winter months to help you kind of warm up and break a sweat.
Mhm.
Just if you get into transition to training more easily. I don't have many people complain that they're really hot or anything, but I think it probably does help you warm up more efficiently. But
Right.
it's a piece in the puzzle.
And what else would be any of the supplements that are recommended from your website for the busy professional who's the stress is kind of negating fat loss and muscle building?
For somebody that's stressed, they need to be very careful not use stimulants because that will exacerbate the problems. So the GCX10 has no stimulants. It's a combination of ATP, glycine, alpha GPC, and lactoferrin. Lactoferrin is very good for attacking stubborn and visceral fat, which is usually an issue for people that are stressed. But the GCX10 is going to help to increase the peak weight loads, the rep capacity, mental focus, again, all without stimulants. And if you train hard, the GCX10 is a very potent weapon. If you don't train worth a shit, don't bother. But if you're not training hard, then what's the purpose? So there needs to be kind of a recalibration of the attitude. You know what I mean? If you're not pushing yourself, then you're leaving a lot on the table. So the GCX10 is a really good tool to improve performance and does not have the negative impact of a high stimulant pre-workout.
Right. And what's interesting is, you and I like I said, we're mid 40s. Looking back to when I was younger, you didn't see too many guys like there was a handful of guys like in the gym in their mid 40s, but like I'm not certainly as strong as I once was, but I trained pretty hard. And it's like
Mm-hmm.
pull-ups and push-ups and deadlift and squat and power clean and push the sleds. And it's like, wow, that's not actually what a normal 46-year-old does. And it's like good to see that. So I think a lot of our listeners are trying to live that lifestyle. So we got the 100% MR. That's a powder.
Yeah.
I've had the muscle synthesis before. I remember that being the powder, and the
Mm-hmm.
GCX10 is what, a pill or a
Capsule.
powder? Capsule.
Capsule. Mm-hmm.
Good. Anything else like the stressed out, busy professional?
The fat reduced FBO 5-day and nighttime formulas, Dr. Serrano put those together to bust through the most significant metabolic and hormonal barriers to fat burning. Great for fat loss, used on a daily basis. There's a day and a nighttime formula, and the nighttime formula actually helps you transition into restful sleep. And by reducing stress levels, has some nice properties to increase the utilization of stored fat during the sleep cycle. But most importantly, by improving sleep, we improve the entire hormonal profile, and we also reduce sugar intake because there's plenty of studies that would suggest people that don't sleep well or enough definitely have a higher consumption of refined sugars and carbohydrate. There's a connection there with poor sleep. So the fat reduced nighttime tends to fix that fairly quickly. And the daytime formula does a great job of shutting down fat stored receptors specific to the midsection. That's really good stuff.
It's interesting because I don't know if I mentioned this when we did the first podcast, but here and there we'll go out, we'll get pizza, and it's like I sleep like shit from
That's an allergy issue.
yeah. And I remember eating pizza in my younger years. Not that I ate it a lot. I was really dialed in, but like it never affected me. I eat pizza. It's like I feel like it's the effect, not that I'm a drinker either, but like I have a hangover. Like I had
No,
12
yeah,
beers.
that's very common for
Horrible.
Dr. Serrano, when he eats pizza, gets back pain. His joints seize up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll definitely feel it in like knees. So that's really interesting. The older we get, the bottom line, Scott, is you really can't do cheat stuff. You
You're
can't.
more sensitive to things is the way, I like to put it. And it's like, look, you got to be smarter in how you approach things. It's just the reality. You can't turn back the clock in a lot of ways. That's just the reality we're dealing with.
Yeah. All right, my man. So this was great for everybody listening, not watching. Scott on the website is infinityfitness.com. A lot of great information on the website. They got a lot of YouTube videos linked up there, and they also have a great Instagram that Scott does back and forth with Dr. Serrano. It would be cool if you and I don't know how techie you guys are, but for you and Doc to like, you should do something like once a month where you're just answering questions. It would be really interesting. I know Eric has been on Brian Peters' podcast like several times because people are firing questions at him. It would be, I think, very beneficial, and people would come into your world. My last podcast, Scott, was essentially about me no longer really spending my time on YouTube. I've got like 5,000 videos on there, but you guys are like such world class that
Thank you.
the people who might be putting out nutrition stuff with highly edited videos, you guys are just such top tier. It'll
Well, I'll tell you
bypass all
what,
that shit.
my email is scott@infinityfitness.com. If anybody has questions for myself and Dr. Serrano, ask away, and I will try and get him to do a video about those. It's just a matter of catching up, but I think his schedule's getting a little better. So I have high hopes that we can get that done. And we're speaking at the Arnold, actually,
First week,
the Friday of the
March.
Arnold Classic. If anybody wants to know about that, email me. I'll get you the info. There's several good speakers, but Dr. Serrano and I will be on for about an hour and a half, I think starting at 8 a.m. And then he's on a panel following that. That's good. So that's actually what the first weekend in March. So the Arnold's happening. I don't know to what extent, but it's happening.
Yeah, I think we're kind of like schools are no longer with the masks around that weekend. I'm not a politics guy, but people are saying it's a midterm election. And they should follow you at infinityfitness.com is the Instagram handle. And try to keep up with that and get connected with you. But Scott, I gotta run. Story of my life here, everybody, for tuning in to another episode of the Strong Life Podcast. I want to thank you. Please share this episode with friends, and you can reach out to Scott as well through Instagram. Him and I often communicate through there. And that's it, Scott. You're like our resident nutrition guru now.
Thank you. I really enjoy it. Thanks a lot.
All right, hang tight while I just shut it down. And everybody, thank you again. We'll talk to you soon.